Today we will have the glimpse of glory of all Dutch masters of painting. This is room 639 of the European painting sections of the Metropolitan Museum on the Fifth Avenue, New York. The whole exhibition is dedicated to so-called new directions in Low Countries art between 15th and 17th century. Early 15th century witnessed the emergence of a new art form that's quickly recognized as one of the most remarkable achievements of the period, panel painting. Key figures of the epoch are Robert Campaign, Jan van Eyck and Rogier van der Weyden. Back in the day, religious subjects were in demand, along with the portraits. No wonder these two genres were the most popular among the painters. Let's have a look at the highlights of the exhibition. Let me introduce you the Crucifixion with Saints and a Donor by Jus van Cleef. The triptych depicts crucifixion witnessed by the Virgin, Saint John, and the kneeling donor with his patron Saint Paul. Four other saints are on the left and right wings. The author is famous for his vast and elaborate landscapes. The picture's background is no exception. However, it is a known fact that the landscapes were drawn by the independent specialist, while Van Cleef focused mainly on the foreground pictures. The triptych was supposed to be an altarpiece, a piece of art that adorns the altar in the church. And like many religious paintings, this one contains small religious subjects portrayed on the background. If you look closely, you can see the scene of carrying Christ's body into the mountain tomb. On the right, we can see another piece by Jus van Cleef, the Annunciation. Gabriel and Mary are presented within an elaborately furnished interior that would have been familiar to 16th century viewers. However, many of the objects on the canvas carry symbolic meaning. With a gesture of his hand, Gabriel announced Mary that she will soon bring Christ into life. Two more pictures by Jus van Cleef are exhibited in the room, The Last Judgment and The Holy Family. Here you can see the rest on the Flight into Egypt, a piece by Gerard David, a Netherlandish painter. This composition presents the flight into Egypt as a continuous narrative. In the tiny background scene, the Holy Family emerges from the forest. A contemporary Netherlandish landscape can be seen on the left, and the foreground, the Virgin is depicted resting with her child. On the left is another piece by the same author called Virgin and Child with Four Angels. Inspiration for this painting was drawn from Jan van Eyck's work on the same subject. He followed the legacy of his well-known Virgin and Child at the fountain. During the epoch, copying someone's work was not an issue as long as the subject was desired by patrons. And for this kind of pictures were believed to have curative properties, Virgin and Child and Four Angels was a success. Further on the left, there is another Annunciation, in this case drawn by Gerard David in 1506, on two panels. These panels were part of the spectacular multi-storied polyptych commissioned by Vincenzo Sauli for the high altar of the Benedictine Abbey Church of San Girolamo della Cervara, near Genoa. The general impression of the scene is bleaker and more serene than the one of Van Cleef's. Here we can see two more pieces by Gerard David, The Crucifixion and The Nativity. The final piece by Gerard David in the exhibition is The Nativity with Donor and Saint Jerome and Leonard. The picture bears all classical features of the subject. The author gave the characters rather somber expression to represent the foreshadowing of Christ's eventual suffering and death. On the opposite side of the room, we are greeted with The Adoration of Magi by Justus van Gent. One peculiarity of the canvas is the figure of the youngest king as a black African, portrayed by author in this way to indicate that the Magi came from the three corners of the world. A black African servant hands him a gift, and there is another black African observed in the crowd. All three share similar features for some reason. Here you can see Head of Saint John the Baptist on the charger by Albert Bouts, above Virgin and Child by Master of the Saint Ursula legend. On the left, you can see Saints Michael and Francis by Juan de Flans. This panel was originally part of a large Spanish altarpiece. The artist placed both figures within niches. While Saint Francis is neatly contained within the shallow space, Michael extends beyond his niche. Stopping the dragon at his feet, the archangel gazes at the city reflected in the shield. To the left, with the another piece by Juan de Flans, Christ appearing to his mother. Juan de Flans immigrated to Spain to serve at the court of Queen Isabella of Castile. In this painting, he suppressed his own individual style and closely copied the work by Rogier van der Weyden that had been owned by the Isabella's father, King Juan II. Further, we can see one of Hieronymus Bosch's earliest works, The Adoration of the Magi. The author creates a stage-like scene with tunneling perspective and a curtain held by angels. To the left, we can see the strictly symmetrical Crucifixion with Donors and Saints Peter and Margaret by Cornelis Angebrechts, who was a leading painter in Leiden in early 16th century. The agony depicted in the painting is intensified by Christ's figure isolating against dark sky, postures echoing his torment and sympathetic gazes. Further to the left, we can see Virgin and Child with Angels by Bernard van Olly. In 1518, he was appointed as official painter to Margaret of Austria, regent of the Netherlands. Presumably around this time frame, he painted the refined and intimate picture of Virgin and Child. The Virgin wears a luxurious fur-trimmed dress and is seated in the ground of the garden of her palace. The distant background is executed in the era of development landscape genre. There are at least 6 types of plants present in the foreground. The next one is 4 Scenes from the Passion by the follower of Bernard van Olly. This panel was probably the centerpiece of a small triptych. The 4 miniature scenes of the agony in the Garden of Gethsemane, Christ bearing the cross, the crucifixion, and the lamentation. The artwork features elaborate fictive frames with statues of Old Testament prophets. Here you can see a sermon on charity by unidentified Netherlandish painter. This panel may represent Saint Anthony listening to a reading from the Gospels and distributing his wealth to the poor, or it may be intended as a more general sermon of the virtues of charity. In either case, the theme reflects the views of the biblical humanist who believes the charity to be a moral obligation. On this wall, we can see Lonely, Christ crowned with thorns, and the Mourning Virgin by Adrian Eisenbrand. In this image, Christ is presented to the people of Jerusalem by Pilate prior to being led off to be crucified. He wears a crown of thorns. Nearly life-size, Christ and his mother are presented directly to the viewer, who becomes Christ's judge as well as a participant in the Virgin's grief. On the stand there is a painting by Bernard van Olly with reverse. On the front it is the birth and naming of Saint John the Baptist. This panel once formed the left wing of the altarpiece dedicated to Saint John the Baptist that was commissioned by the Benedictine Abbey Church. It depicts Saint Elizabeth in the bed shortly after giving birth to the newborn saint. The Harris appears at the entrance of her room, carrying a scroll which declares his son's name will be shown. The reverse is the trompe-l'oeil, an imitating painting's back that depicts a man of sorrows in the corner. This is essentially Christ with the wounds of his passion. On the main stand, there are 2 triptychs. The first one is The Penitence of Saint Jerome by Joachim Patener. Following Netherlandish tradition, large-scale sacred figures dominate the foreground of the interior. Saint John baptizing Christ, Saint Jerome, Saint Anthony the Hermit with the monsters that assailed him. The picture's true subject, however, is the magnificent panoramic landscape, which the viewer is encouraged to travel through visually in the manner of pilgrimage. The other triptych is the Le Cellier altarpiece by Jean Belkin, and the picture we can see the Virgin with her child seated on the majestic throne. At the foot of the throne, three nailed figures of the donors. Saint Bernard is standing on the left interior wing. This picture finishes our trip to the room 639 of the European Painting section of the Metropolitan Museum on the Fifth Avenue, New York.